All right.
Okay, welcome. I'll just talk for a few minutes and then introduce our presenter. So welcome to the first session of the 2023 Oregon Reference Summit online. I'm Lori Moore. I use she, her pronouns, and I work for the Multnomah County Library as the Workforce Development Librarian. I'll be your moderator for this session. For our attendees, just remember to keep it muted, and you can keep your cameras off while the presenter is speaking. That helps with the recording. There'll be time at the end allowed for questions. You can certainly put your questions in the chat throughout if you like, but also we'll have room for people just to ask out loud at the end. So our first presentation is Library Services for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Individuals. Our presenter is Enrique Rivera, also from Multnomah County Library. His session will be about 30 minutes with Q&A. I will stop sharing, and Enrique, you can take it away.
All right. Well, I'm going to share my screen. So I have like two computer things going on here. So it'll be just 1 second. All right. And now I have a slideshow. Well, again, my name is Enrique Rivera. I have he, him pronouns. I'm a library outreach specialist at Multnomah County. I'm a Mexican-American, a dedicated father, a loving husband, and I have personally experienced incarceration. So, oh, come on, next slide. There we are. So, usually when I tell people that, I kind of want to give a little bit of a background, so, that people don't just wind up in prison. There's kind of a history that takes one to there. So I was no different. My childhood was marked by, constant moving. I experienced some severe physical abuse during my early years. I grew up in poverty, and then I was exposed to gang violence, which unfortunately led me down that old school to prison pipeline. So at the age of 17, I was involved in a gang-related incident, a shooting that resulted in the injury of 2 people, and I was incarcerated for 70 months. So I had the opportunity to present the other day at OSU, about this. So I figure I want to talk a little bit about what it's like to be incarcerated before I get on to, some of our other services. So at 17 years old, I was, put into, I was charged as an adult under Oregon's Measure 11, and I was placed into a county jail. So I'm still, juvenile, but I'm in with the adults now in a county jail. And that experience, initially it was sort of scary. I'd been in JDH plenty of times. JDH at the time in Marion County was basically just solitary confinement. So you'd be in a room, 23-hour lockdown a day. And if you were there for a little bit longer, you go out in the day room and there'd be silence and things like that. So when I first got to county jail, since I was a juvenile, they put me in a similar sort of situation. But after about 2 weeks, they put me in the general pop, the main pop. And it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. In fact, it was quite typical of what you might think of, a prison experience was. I got there. There were people that knew me, people that I knew. There was friends and foes. But it was kind of like prison rules. I get to there. Of course, I had folks that didn't like me because of our gang rivalries, so I had to get in a fight to be able to hang out on the yard. And people took notice, and it was almost like they were grooming me in a way, because these were some sureños that wanted, to hang out and recruit me, basically. But I went through the county jail process to await trial, and after seeing about, a number of my friends try to take their case to trial, get incarcerated for like long periods of times. By the time my attorney came to me with a plea bargain saying, if you just plead guilty, we'll run your sentences consecutively, I was like, okay, I'll take the 70 months and just get on with my life. So at that point, I was sentenced, and I was sentenced to, the rest of my 70 months time served and placed in the McLaren Youth Correctional Facility. And, again, I had to adjust there. It was a lot different than county jail. It seems there was a lot more rules because of the facility, being a mix of juveniles and adult offenders, young adults. You could be there until you were 25 as long as you entered before you were 18. So initially, I didn't even want to stay there, started getting some problems. But one thing I remembered from my experience in county jail was having a conversation with a couple of guys who would have been about my age now, about like 40 some odd years old. And, we were just having a conversation like we were just chums, regular old homies. And it dawned on me that it was like ghosts of Christmas future, that if I didn't change my ways, that could be me when I'm like 40, or 50. Or one of the guys was like, he was elderly. He was, in his 80s, and he'd been in and out of jail his entire life. And I decided, that's not what I want to do with my life. So McLaren had a number of programs, one of which was a mandatory high school completion. So, I mean, I had to do that if I wanted to stay there. And then they had higher education. They had Chemeketa Community College, and like this is back in 2002. So we got to give Chemeketa Community College some real credit here. They had distance education. When Pell Grants had been taken out, they were still doing it. So I was able to take, some college credits, get most of my associate's degree before I was released. And that happened in 2004. Now, this is where my library short story starts. I was released up here to Portland. I didn't want to go back to Marion County. I knew if I went there, then I was just going to, have problems. It's either I'd wind up running to friends or I'd wind up running to foes. And either way, it wasn't going to be good. So I came up here to Portland. And my uncle, he worked for, Department of Community Justice. He was a counselor, and he knew all the resources around. And so the first resource that he pointed me to was the Multnomah County Library. And I went to the Belmont branch. I needed help with getting on a computer. I mean, I had distance education, but the computer access there was very limited. So my digital literacy skills were pretty slim, So, and not only that, but like to sign on to a library computer, it takes a little more. So I had to get this card, and let me start my library story here. I had to get this card, a library card. And in order to do that, you need an ID. So if you look up to the top here, you can see my Department of Corrections inmate identification card. And so I used that to get an ID. It was kind of embarrassing. I just got out. Like when I was in custody, I had my reputation, I had my homies, all that kind of stuff. And, I was doing good. I won an award for art from the governor and all this kind of stuff. So I had some clout there. But when I get out, this is just who I am, Department of Corrections inmate number 127-297-397, And so there was that piece of dignity that was missing, but I got some respect at the library. They didn't hassle me like I thought or whatever, oh, you can't use that card. They accepted it. I got a card. They got me on a computer, and they helped me sign up for classes at PCC, which was one of the things I was trying to do. The next thing they did was help me with my resume. I think it was a disc. I don't even think we had USBs at that time, but it was one of those, not a floppy disk, but the harder ones. And I had this, resume on there that was just, riddled with typos. The grammar wasn't all that great. And so they helped me fix it up. And then I printed out about 30 copies. I had $3 at the time. You had to print, 30 copies. And I ran up and down, the Hawthorne Avenue, because this is Belmont. I lived around there with my uncle. And I was just turning my resume to whoever would, take it. And eventually I got a job at a taqueria, Cha Cha Cha. Shout out to them for giving me a chance. And, that was it. I mean, that was great. I went to PCC, graduated PSU. And then eventually, I applied for jobs. You know, there were some disappointments here and there, but the Multnomah County Library took a chance on me, and there's my next little ID right there. You know, Enrique Rivera Library Department. You know, so I worked my way through the library as a page to a clerk to a library assistant. And, you know, I was doing all the things that we do there, you know, doing outreach, this and that. And I heard about this outreach that was going on at Donald Lee Long. So I wanted to get on that. And then I heard about this outreach that was going on in CRCI. And, you know, I was like, I could do this. This is, you know, these are my people in a way. So I did that, and eventually, you know, I was able to go in and just tell my library story. We present a class each month. I just went to it yesterday, and at this class, we, you know, give people information about the library. We, you know, sign them up for cards, so when they leave, they get to have a card when they get out. So I want to talk a little bit now about just the value of library services to incarcerated persons. So the book restrictions in the United States is like the largest book ban policy in prisons. So, I mean, folks, you know, have very limited access to reading material. I mean, there's plenty of libraries and things like that, but, you know, sometimes the books, they just ban them arbitrarily. I wasn't really much into reading per se when I was incarcerated. I mean, everybody reads. It's just a good way to pass time. But I didn't have like anybody that was like, you know, a reader's advisor or any, you know, I had one friend who liked to read. And so he handed me like, you know, some books. I had another friend who was just a fan of the S.E. Hinton series. And that seemed to resonate with me at the time. And then I read I got all my J.D. Salinger books from Kip Kinkle, you know. But anyways, about 15% of adults in Oregon prisons read below the 8th grade level. That was also true for me. I had stopped participating in grade school at about 4th grade. I mean, I still went, but I mean, I just was not there for school purposes. And then access to learning in incarceration settings reduces recidivism by 43%. With Chemeketa's program, that's actually like down to 6%. And then California has this Project Rebound program that, you know, reduces recidivism to about 1%. So, I mean, access to education information is very important for helping folks, you know. Here's a couple, you know, more bits of information, the sort of same thing, you know, 70% of adults can't read at 4th grade level across the country. In Oregon, it's about 15. And then 50% of American adults have had a family member in jail or in prison. And then the U.S. holds about 20% of the world's incarcerated population. I want to say it's like roughly 2.5 million. And then here's the thing. 95% of all adults in custody will eventually return to the community, whether they're ready or not to secure a job, whether they've had treatment, anything. I mean, you could just be you know, an F up your entire time, you know, as long as you don't catch any new charges, you're going to get out. That's just it. So, I mean, these are folks that are in our community. It's, you know, we want to rehabilitate folks. We want folks to get access to information. We want them not to recidivate. I mean, in Oregon, it costs what, $47,000 a year to house an adult in custody. It only costs about $6,000 to educate one. But you can see there at the bottom, the funding for education in Oregon prisons accounts for less than 6% of their entire budget. So, yeah. So then MCL services to adults in custody. This is just an overview of all the services. I don't provide all of these, but, you know, these are what we do right now. So Inverness County Jail, the Justice Center, one of our colleagues, Carol Cooks, purchases the books for those two facilities. They run a class. I had the privilege of participating for about 5 months in a class that at Inverness that we did the same sort of, you know, handed out the packets and gave library information and whatnot. But Inverness is medium security. It has about, you know, 1,037 beds. It's men, women, and people of other gender identities. It's a county jail. The detention center, also called the Justice Center, is medium to maximum. We don't have any direct services there, but Carol buys books for them, and it's county, state, and some federal detainees as well. So what happens there is, of course, there's books to the dorms, there's the library class session, there's A book is a bridge, which is an early childhood literacy class. And then there's a women's book discussion group. And then they offer a children's play area in the visiting lobby. So Carol puts the books there for folks while they're waiting to see their loved ones. This is just a picture of, the Justice Center downtown, and then the Inverness Jail, which is out in East County. That's the Humble Library. It's basically just some shelves. You can see it down in the corner. There are books in it. These are books that they can't have in the dorm, mainly because they're hardback, or they're books that are really expensive, so they can't buy a copy for each dorm. But yeah, so adults in custody have access. It's not much. I'd like to see more, eventually, but they're able to go into there about once a month for a few hours to check out the other books that they can't get in the dorm. Columbia River Correctional Institute. So this is a medium to minimum security prison, well, minimum security prison. It's for men that are nearing release. So you'll see folks there who, maybe they spent 30 years or, nearly 30 years at another prison in Oregon, like OSP or Snake River or one of the more long-term facilities. And now, and they're from, Multnomah County. So when they're about to be released, they get sent to Columbia River Correctional Institute. And what we do at the Columbia River Correctional Institute, oops, that's not the one I wanted to do. Give me back that. So we have a book as a bridge there, which is, of course, the early literacy course. And then we also do the classes. During COVID, we weren't able to provide any services, so we just purchased books. And I'm going to kind of speed through this last bit since, we want to leave some time for questions. But yeah, we now deliver books and folders and card applications in the form of the library class that we can get in. We mail books to children during the COVID. We did that. Oh, excuse me. Anyways, when COVID was happening, we could only mail books. So we had mailed books to children, but now we can start giving folks books directly. Like yesterday, when we presented our class, at the end of it, each adult gets a book to take back to their dorm. But in the class, we let folks know that they'll have a better idea of how to use the library and what you can find there, know about classes and support you can find at the library for job hunting, learning about technology, learning adult literacy, and then have that library card. A little bit of feedback we've gotten from the folks there. Books are a source of freedom for me, makes us feel like we're making good use of our time and not just rotting in jail. They help me get my mind away from the negative thoughts and have been a relief to the torture of being incarcerated. Reference by mail is another service that we provide. So last year my time to me is such a different concept at this point, but I believe it was last year, we took over the reference by mail service from San Francisco Public Library. We were always doing reference by mail, but now we have like that service directed towards us. Before it was them, and they were getting like 100, 200 letters from Oregon a month. And well, now we are, but the reference by mail is great because AICs already have a really limited access to information. I mean, if you don't have any friends or family, and a lot of folks don't, when they're in custody, they lose all their friends or, they've burned bridges with their families. So they don't really have channels of information. So this can help folks get prepared for reentry. It can help them make decisions about job opportunities when they're leaving, housing and community resources, and also just for, entertainment purposes. I mean, you might want to know some things, receiving a letter could also have a positive emotional impact. I knew a guy once who just, would try to get like coupons or something sent to, I forget what it was, like brochures, just so he could have some mail, but it helps you feel more connected to the outside, and it reminds you that you're valued. Okay, so here's some feedback by the Ref by Mail program. They appreciate what we have to offer. Y'all can read that, but I think I like the last one. If you could aid me in getting my brain back from agony's grip, I would fervently worship Multnomah County Library Community Service as a shining reflection in my heart's desire. So people have fun. Okay, one partnership I did want to highlight is one that I constantly refer folks to in my CRCI class. I co-presented with Jeff Brunk, so shout out to Jeff. He started before I did, but they provide an expungement clinic at PCC Cascade. They do DACA renewals, weekly clinics at recovery centers, and more. So if you want to take that information, I can share the slides in the end, and then that's just a little bit more. But I'm going to end this presentation here and with that, and just leave it open for some questions.
Thanks, Enrique. As always, I feel so lucky to have you as my colleague for your experiences and expertise and the great things that we're able to do. I don't see any questions in the chat. Does anybody have a question for Enrique? You're welcome to raise your hand or put it in the chat. And we've got Mark, go ahead.
Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Sometimes my computer likes to pick the wrong apparatus. So for those of us, here we go. You mentioned earlier that like 95% of adults in custody will return out to outside custody. For those of us working in libraries, are there things that we could be doing or services or collection areas that would be most helpful to that population that maybe we're not aware of because we've never been in that situation?
I think some of the biggest things is, I mean, when you're getting out for like a long period of time, the world just passes you by. When I went from pagers to cell phones. So one of the major things, and here's a thing, like when I'm at the desk, when I was at the desk at the Central Library, I could always tell a person who had just done some time. They'd come in with like this new device and they would be young, and it's like, the way that they present themselves, and they just didn't know how to use it. Technology is one of the biggest things that people have challenges with when they're being released, because I mean, one, we're so like dependent upon it now, and even if they've had some before, like I mentioned, folks don't get the education that they generally prior to being incarcerated, so I would mention sort of anything that's kind of tech related, especially if it's individualized one-on-one help. Materials, I mean, books about that kind of stuff. I mean, there's also books specifically for folks who are reentering, but information changes so much that they're not. I mean, I read through like the the resume for ex-offenders, and it's like, it's not that great. But just kind of like direct services, I think, like at the branch is usually best. I see a question there from Spencer Ellis. You mentioned that book does come from a library's collection development. Oh, yeah. So the books that are purchased for the facilities comes from, well, one, we have a budget for a certain amount of stuff, but then there's also the Friends of the Library grant for like the Books of the Bridge project. Okay, are there policy efforts we can support that may impact collections at correctional facilities? I've been inquiring about things. I learned that they used to have ILL prior to COVID. Originally, the impression I got was that service wasn't provided, but it seems that it was prior to COVID, and they would like to bring it back, but it's spatial limitations in the facilities that prevent it. But I mean, I know that right now there's a national, bill going that they're trying to sign off for libraries and prisons. I don't know the exact details off the top of my head, but when you see that kind of stuff, being vocal about it, I mean, just, supporting those sort of policies, I think, learning what. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult when you start talking to policies, because there's the Oregon Justice Resource Center has a lot of information about that, and they definitely fight for the rights of folks in Oregon they're in custody, and yeah, Penn America, they do a lot of great stuff too.
Thanks, Enrique. Any other questions?
I have another one.
Sure, go ahead.
I think general interest to everyone, but if there's anybody that's here today who is interested in maybe, like you said, some tech classes might help, or just working a little more specifically with these populations, how would they go about getting started with that?
Well, you have to know who the people are, But if you could either do more of like a specific sort of like program, this program is for folks of this, I would also advise like reaching out to your local county facility. If there's a prison in your area, I mean, Oregon has a lot of them, so seeing if you could, get in contact with, whoever that might be, and just being able to go in and visit and present some sort of class. And then that way, like I always mention in the classes, that folks can come to the library and they can even reach out for me specifically, if they want to make a tech help appointment. But I just let them know that we do have one-on-one tech help and they can ask for that. So, I mean, if that's the type of program that you have at a library, a lot of branches don't, libraries throughout Oregon might not have the resources that Multnomah County does. But if you can spare some time to sit down with somebody, then that's really one of the best ways, I would say.
And I did just put in the chat the email address where folks can contact you at Multnomah County, Enrique, in case they have follow-up questions. We do have a few more minutes, though, if anybody else has a question. Yes, Kayla.
Thank you for your presentation. That was amazing. I loved that. It was very, very, I don't know, impactful on me. So thank you. So I work with youth who are in the detention center, and they are very much so less excited when we do career readiness stuff. Do you have any advice on how to maybe make that a little bit more impactful on them?
I wish I did. I mean, yeah, the thing with, it's a difficult with the youth, because when I was a kid, when I was doing all that stuff, I was having the time of my life. I mean, I used to sell drugs and I had money in my pocket, and money brings like friends and other things that weren't real, of course, but I thought I was like the man. And so for someone to come and tell me that I had to do something else, I'm like, you got to be kidding me. My life is like a movie right now, And unfortunately, a lot of times it does take an event like this to get somebody on the right track, but not always. Not always. I think consistency is what's best. I mean, as long as you're showing up, as long as you're showing that like you care about someone, I mean, you might not have the impact in the moment that you're looking for, but maybe somewhere down the line they'll think back about that. Because I remember the first time anybody ever told me that they actually believed in me was right before I went into custody. My probation officer, her name was Roberta Maestes. She came to me right before they were going to send me to the adult county jail, and she was, talked about how disappointed she was in the fact that this had happened, and the disappointment was based on the fact that she actually believed in me. And maybe if she would have said those words prior to me having done that, it might have been a little bit, but I just recall that those words like did have an impact, and there was at least someone that I knew who had believed in me. So, I mean, I didn't realize that until like later on in life. Oh, those were some pretty impactful words. So, consistency, being there.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you, Enrique. I think you said something right at the beginning that resonated with me too, that when you went to the library and felt embarrassed, that you were welcomed, that you were not judged, and that they broke down the barriers and gave you a card, despite what you felt might not be helpful ID. And I think all of us hopefully are doing that, but can continue to. I think that's a really good first step.
I agree.
Any last questions for Enrique? Okay. Thank you so much, Enrique. We really appreciate it.
All right. You're welcome. I gotta go do outreach now. So
Bye-bye.
bye.